The money was good. That was the only honest thing Celeste could say about working the floor at Aurelius. The tips were extraordinary, the kind that made your rent feel like a distant, manageable problem instead of a wall closing in, but the emotional cost of standing perfectly still while someone looked through you like you were a piece of furniture. That cost accumulated. It added up in the small muscles of your jaw, in the way you learned to breathe slowly through your nose when a man twice your age called you girl, without looking up from his phone. Celeste Nakamura had been working the floor at Aurelius for 14 months. She was 28 years old, and she was very good at her job, and she had learned, the hard way, in the first 3 weeks, that being good at your job in a place like this meant making yourself smaller than you actually were. Aurelius was the kind of restaurant where the lighting was designed to make wealthy people look younger and everyone else invisible. It occupied the top 2 floors of a converted building in the financial district, the kind of neighborhood where SUVs idled at the curb for 20 minutes and no one said anything. The menu changed seasonally. The sommelier, a quiet Belgian man named Felix, had once told Celeste that the cheapest bottle on the list cost more than his first car. She had laughed. He hadn't been joking. She had come to this job through the back door of necessity, not ambition. 2 years earlier, she had been finishing her 3rd year of a biochemistry degree at the University of Michigan, carrying a 3.9 GPA and a letter of intent from a graduate program that had called her among the most promising applicants we have reviewed in a decade. Then her mother had gotten sick, not vaguely sick, not manageable sick, the kind of sick that required specialists and a medication regimen that cost more per month than Celeste's tuition. Her father worked in logistics. Her younger brother was still in high school. The math was not complicated, and it was not kind. She had left school quietly, without drama, without a scene. She had taken the first job she could find that paid well, and had flexible hours for the days she drove her mother to treatment. She had found Aurelius through a friend of a friend, had walked in for the interview in the wrong shoes and somehow gotten the job anyway, and had spent the 14 months since then learning exactly how much contempt a person could absorb. Before it started to feel normal, the answer, she had discovered, was more than she'd expected. And that frightened her. On the night everything changed, Celeste was assigned to Table 9. Table 9 was in the east corner of the upper dining room, partially shielded from the rest of the floor by a curved partition of frosted glass. It was considered one of the prestige tables, private enough for sensitive conversations, positioned for the best view of the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The reservation had been made 6 weeks in advance under the name Hargrove, Party of 4. She knew the name. Everyone on staff knew the name. Roland Hargrove was the founder and majority shareholder of Hargrove Capital, a private equity firm that had, in the last decade, acquired and restructured no fewer than 7 hospital networks across the Midwest. He was 61, silver-haired, and possessed of the particular confidence that comes not from having earned respect, but from having never had to ask for it. He had dined at Aurelius perhaps a dozen times in the past year. The staff had a shorthand for guests like him, a word they used only among themselves, quietly, in the kitchen: architect. As in, someone who had built their entire personality on the assumption that other people existed to serve their vision. He arrived at 7:45 with 3 companions, a woman his age who wore her posture like a weapon, a younger man in a charcoal suit who had the tight, watchful expression of someone perpetually preparing for a deposition, and a second woman, perhaps 40, who laughed at everything Hargrove said approximately 3 seconds after he said it, which suggested she was either charmed or employed by him. Possibly both. Celeste greeted them in the way she had been trained, the welcome without warmth, efficiency without civility. She recited the evening's specials. She poured water. She noted, as she always did, the particular way Hargrove arranged himself in his chair, leaned back, one arm draped along the top of the booth, the posture of a man who considered every room an extension of his own living room. He did not look at her once during this exchange. He was talking to the man in the charcoal suit about a deal structure. Celeste stood at the edge of the table, water pitcher in hand, and waited for a pause that didn't come. "Sir," she said at a natural break, "may I start you off with something from the bar, or shall I give you a moment with the wine list?" He waved his free hand in her direction, not at her, around her, the way you might wave at a draft coming through a window. "Wine list," he said to the other man. She placed the list back at his elbow and moved away. This was the ordinary texture of her evenings at Aurelius. She did not take it personally because she had learned that taking it personally was a form of self-destruction she could not afford. She had a mother who needed her to be functional. She had tuition debt that existed in suspension, not erasure. She had not a detailed one, not yet, but the outline of one. And that plan required her to be here, to be steady, to be good at this job for a while longer. So she managed table 9 the way she managed all her difficult tables, with precision and without feeling. The evening proceeded. The party ordered well. A 2018 Barolo that Felix described to them with his characteristic quiet reverence, a shared board of charcuterie, the seared duck breast and the wagyu, a Dover sole for the woman who laughed. Celeste moved between the table and the kitchen with the practiced efficiency that had made her one of the top-earning servers on staff. She refilled glasses before they were empty. She removed plates before they became conspicuous. She was, as she had been for 14 months, very good at disappearing. It was during the main course that the dynamic shifted. She had returned to the table to check on the food. A standard visit, nothing unusual. And she was aware the moment she arrived that the mood had changed. The man in the charcoal suit had grown quieter. The woman who laughed was not laughing. Hargrove was leaning forward now, his elbow on the table, speaking in a lower register. He had the focused look of a man mid-negotiation. She waited at the appropriate distance, as she had been trained. Hargrove glanced up, and in that moment, he said something that stopped her. He said it in Japanese. Not to her. He turned to the man beside him. The charcoal suit whose name she had heard was Brennan, and he said something in Japanese quickly like an aside, and then he looked back at Celeste with a particular kind of smile. "You don't." What he said, translated, was this: "She has no idea what we're saying. Keep talking." And then, these people never do. Celeste did not move. She did not change her expression. She had an expression she kept for moments like this, not blank, exactly, but neutral in the way that a still pond is neutral, which is to say, concealing depth. Her father was Japanese-American, third generation, from a family in Sacramento. Her grandmother had been born in the internment camps at Manzanar, a fact her father had told her once, quietly, when she was 9, in a way that she had understood even then was not for casual repetition. Her grandmother had survived that experience, had rebuilt, had made a life, had spent 40 years teaching elementary school in Fresno. She had also, in the particular way of her generation, insisted that her grandchildren speak Japanese. Speak it. At the dinner table, on the phone, during visits that Celeste had once found tedious, and now, considered among the most formative experiences of her life. She was, in the polite terminology of heritage language speakers, fluent. She was, in more honest terms, the person her grandmother had most wanted her to be, which is to say, someone who could not be erased by assumption. Hargrove did not know this. He had looked at her, brown eyes, dark hair worn back, the blue uniform of the Aurelius floor staff. And he had made a calculation. He had decided what she was and what she wasn't. He had decided, as men like him often did, that the woman refilling his wine glass was a prop in his evening rather than a person with a history he knew nothing about. He kept talking. Brennan, the charcoal suit, glanced at Celeste once and then away. He was not comfortable. She could see that. He had the look of a man who had been asked to be complicit in something he found distasteful, but lacked the framework to refuse. What Hargrove said over the next several minutes, as Celeste stood at a distance and the table continued to eat, was not simply insulting. It was illuminating. He talked about a negotiation, a hospital network in Ohio, one of his acquisitions, and a pending deal involving the reallocation of a pension fund. He was not careful about specifics. He never had to be careful about specifics, in his experience, because no one in the room could understand him. He talked about numbers. He talked about a board member. Int? Who was being managed. He talked about timing. Specifically, the timing of a public announcement relative to a private transaction that would, if she understood correctly, allow certain parties to reposition their holdings before the market was informed. He was, in the language of securities law, describing insider trading. He said all of this in Japanese, across the dinner table, to a man who nodded and ate his wagyu, while Celeste Nakamura stood 12 feet away and heard every word. She did not reach for her phone. She did not signal to a colleague. She did not do anything except continue to do her job, which was to ensure that Table 9 had everything it needed. She returned to the table to refill Brennan's water. She asked, in her clearest English, whether the wagyu was to everyone's satisfaction. Hargrove said, "Fine," and turned back to his companion. Then he said something else in Japanese, something shorter, something that in English translated to, "Smile, girl. That's what we pay you for." Celeste poured the water. She looked at the city lights through the window. She looked at her own reflection in the glass for just a moment. The uniform, the picture, the careful posture, and something settled in her chest like a stone finding the bottom of a lake. She had a decision to make. She could continue the way she had been continuing for 14 months, which was to absorb and move forward and not disturb the equilibrium of the room. She was good at that. She had become, without intending to, an expert at it. Or she could do something else. She returned to the kitchen. She requested her break, 5 minutes, which Aurelius allowed during the main course service window if the floor was covered. She stood at the small counter near the back door where the staff kept their personal items, and she wrote on the back of an order ticket a series of notes. Times. Tick-fick. Specific phrases. Specific figures. She wrote them the way she had been taught to take notes in her biochemistry labs, which was precisely, completely, without editorial. Then she folded the ticket and put it in the pocket of her apron. She returned to the floor. For the remainder of the meal, she was exactly what Hargrove believed her to be, a server, attentive and invisible. She brought the dessert course. She described the cheese selection. She offered coffee and the petit fours that Aurelius placed on each table at the close of the meal. Hargrove ordered a cognac. When she brought it, he finally looked at her directly, not at her face exactly, more at the general area of her uniform, the way a person looks at a coat rack rather than whoever hung the coat there. "You can wrap up the check," he said. "Of course," she said, and then she said, in Japanese, in the same quiet, level tone she used for everything, "I hope the pension fund performs as expected. The timing sounds important." The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man who has just heard a language he did not expect spoken by a person he had decided, in advance, was incapable of speaking it. Hargrove went still, not dramatically. He was not a man given to visible reactions, which was how he had gotten as far as he had. But there was a moment, perhaps 3 seconds, where the cognac glass remained in the air between them and nothing happened. And in that moment, every calculation he had made about the evening rearranged itself. Brennan, across the table, set down his fork. The older woman had stopped talking mid-sentence. The woman who laughed was not laughing. Celeste held his gaze, pleasantly, professionally, without aggression. She had spent 14 months perfecting the expression she wore now, and she recognized, with a clarity that surprised her, that she had been practicing for exactly this. "Is there anything else I can bring you?" she asked. In English. Hargrove said nothing. She left the check on the table and walked back toward the kitchen. She did not run. She did not shake. Her hands were steady in the way. Her hands were always steady when something important was happening, which she had first noticed in the hospital waiting room the day her mother was diagnosed, and which she had come to understand was not coldness but focus. Her body's particular response to stakes. In the kitchen, she spoke to the manager on duty, a compact, efficient woman named Sasha, who had been running Aurelius's floor for 9 years, and who had, in that time, seen most things. Celeste told her, calmly, and without omission, what he described at table 9. She produced the folded order ticket from her apron pocket. Sasha read it. She read it again. Her expression did not change much, but the quality of her attention shifted in a way Celeste recognized. "Is this accurate?" Sasha asked. "To the best of my ability to transcribe," Celeste said. "I'm a heritage speaker. I've been speaking Japanese since I was 4. Sasha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need to make a call." What happened next unfolded over the course of 45 minutes, during which Table 9 received their cognac and their check and their petit fours and their coats retrieved from the cloakroom, entirely without incident, because Celeste continued to do her job. Hargrove signed the bill. He tipped well. 19%, which for him was probably automatic, a number selected without thought. He stood and buttoned his jacket and said something to Brennan about a car. The party moved toward the elevator. Celeste watched them from across the floor. She did not follow. She had already done what she needed to do. The call Sasha had made was to the restaurant's legal counsel, whose number she kept in her phone because this was, after all, a restaurant where things sometimes happened. The counsel had asked 3 questions and then said to preserve everything. The order ticket, a written statement from Celeste, any corroborating staff who might have observed the exchange, and to advise Celeste to speak with an attorney before taking any further independent action. Celeste nodded when Sasha relayed this. "Do you know an attorney?" Sasha asked. "Not yet," Celeste said, "but I know how to find one." This was true. She had spent 3 years in a rigorous science program. She knew how to research. She knew how to read documents. She knew how to locate information, assess its credibility, and act on it in an organized way. These were skills that did not expire when you left school. They lived in you, the way language lives in you. Not in your mind, exactly, but somewhere closer to the bone. Over the following weeks, Celeste did not make any public statements. She did not post on social media. She did not speak to journalists, though 2 reached out after certain things became public, as they eventually did. These matters have a way of surfacing, particularly when multiple parties are aware of them, and one of those parties is a securities attorney who knows which regulatory body to call. She gave a formal statement. She submitted her notes. She answered questions with the same precision she had brought to her lab reports years earlier, when a professor had once written in the margin of her work, "Remarkable clarity for someone with so much to prove." She had thought about that comment often in the months since leaving school. The assumption embedded in it that she had something to prove, that her clarity was remarkable rather than simply present. She had never been sure whether to feel flattered or insulted. She understood it better now. She understood that for certain people, in certain rooms, the existence of competence in an unexpected vessel was always framed as remarkable, always slightly astonishing, never simply true. Roland Hargrove did not go to prison immediately. These things took time, more time than felt just, and with more lawyers than felt reasonable. But the preliminary investigation that opened in the months following the dinner at Aurelius was not closed. It expanded. Brennan, it turned out, was more willing to cooperate than his careful expression had suggested. And the board member who was being managed, as Hargrove had put it, had apparently been waiting for exactly this kind of opening. Celeste did not track the case obsessively. She checked in sometimes, the way you check on a process you've set in motion but no longer control. She had her own things to tend to. Her mother's most recent scan had come back clean, not remission. The doctor was careful not to use that word yet, but meaningfully improved. The medication was working. The specialist had said something about reevaluating the treatment plan in 6 months, and the way she had said it suggested optimism rather than caution. Celeste was still working at Aurelius. Sasha had given her a schedule adjustment that allowed for more of the lucrative weekend shifts, which was not explicitly a thank you, but understood to be one. She was, by every measurable standard, still a waitress in a restaurant where she was largely invisible to the people she served. But she had also, quietly, made an appointment with the admissions office at a university 30 minutes from her apartment. Not Michigan, that chapter had its own shape, with a financial aid counselor who had been unexpectedly kind on the phone. She was not sure yet what she was going back for. There were several possibilities. Biochemistry still interested her, but she had spent the past year developing a particular understanding of certain spaces, the gap between what powerful people said in front of witnesses and what they believed those witnesses could comprehend, and that understanding had a shape she wanted to think more carefully about. She had mentioned this, once, to Felix the sommelier, over the small meal the kitchen staff shared after service on Sunday nights. He had listened and then said, in the measured way he said most things, that it sounded to him like she was describing a vocation. She had thought about that word on the drive home. She had turned it over the way you turn a stone to see what's underneath. Vocation. Not just a job, not even just a career. Something closer to a calling. The intersection of what you were capable of and what the world, it turned out, actually needed from you. Her grandmother had been an elementary school teacher for 4 decades. Not because she had no other options. She had been, by all accounts, an exceptionally intelligent woman, but because she had understood, with the particular clarity of someone who had survived the worst that assumption and fear could produce, that the most radical thing she could do was shape the next generation's sense of what was possible. Celeste wasn't sure she was called to that exactly, but she recognized the principle. She drove home through the financial district, past the building where Aurelius occupied its 2 glowing floors, past the SUVs still idling at the curb even at this hour, and she thought about a man who had looked through her at dinner and seen nothing. She thought about her grandmother, who had taught her to speak a language she carried in her body like a second skeleton, invisible, structural, impossible to take from her. She thought about a folded order ticket in an apron pocket, and precision in the face of pressure, and the strange arithmetic of what you know versus what others believe you know. The city lights were not the mountains, but they were hers, and the road was open, and she had a long memory and a good deal of time.